There is a political term called toxic masculinity that is making the rounds today. And it is the idea that men should be less like men. That men are too aggressive. They are too domineering. They are too violent. And if you could take men and make them more like women, and make the women more like men, then we would get along a lot better. And you wouldn't have all of these wars. You wouldn't have all of these chaos that goes on because of masculine men. If we could just do away with that. And so it is a term that you hear in political circles, toxic masculinity. But I don't want you to think that it's just a philosophy that people talk about. Because it is an ideology that has been implemented in this country for the past 50 or 60 years. And it has been incredibly successful. It has also been incredibly destructive to the family. So I want to set the stage today about masculinity, because what we need in this country is not less masculine men, but more masculine men. And I am not talking about everyone, but I am talking about an agenda. I am talking about a direction. I am talking about a template that our society is trying to push young men into, to where they will conform to the society and become what I call a feminized male. A man that acts more like what a woman acts like. About 50 years ago, Women's Lib came along and said that you women don't need a man. Why, you want to get an education, make your own money, and that way you don't have to put up with some sorry man. You can go out and work, bring home the bacon, put it in a pan, fry it up, and don't even worry about having a man. And so the conformity in this country is the idea that you don't really need a man to raise a family. You can do it by yourself. And there are many, many people that are rearing children by themselves. And if you are in a family such as that, go home and give your mother, probably you're living with your mother, give her a big hug and thank her for all that she does. But God never meant for a daddy's influence not to be in the home. He never meant for a woman to do it all. Those of you that have step families and stepdads and stepmoms, go home and give them a hug. Because there is decreasingly a number of men in this country that are willing to marry, that are willing to provide and protect children that are not biologically their own. So if you have a stepdad, go tell him thanks, because he doesn't have to be there. And if you live in a family where biologically your mom and dad are still there, go home and give your dad a hug and thank him for staying there, for being there. So if you have the idea that we increasingly have less and less men have an influence in the home. There are many young boys that grow up from the time they are born until they are 17 or 18 and never have a father figure in the home. Never have anybody to look at them and be able to model what a dad should be like. And that is increasingly common in our society. The results are in. There does need to be a dad in the home. A dad makes an incredible difference in the home. Let me give you some commonalities. Most crime is committed by young men between the ages of 18 and 30. If you take all the millions of young men that are incarcerated in prisons around this country, and you look at them and you think, what is similar? What characteristics do they share that is common to each other? And you might think, well, it's poverty. You know, if you could get people out of poverty, you wouldn't have crime. But you would be wrong. The greatest commonality between criminals is there is no dad in the home. They never had a dad to jerk them up and say, you will not do that. Never had a dad to say, this is the boundary. You can go this far and no further, and if you go past there's a price to be paid. Almost all people in prison did not have a father as a role model. And you can look at the gangs today that roam the cities, from Montgomery to Washington, D.C., to Detroit, to Chicago. There, once again, who are the young men? What's the commonality with these young men, these young thugs running around acting like they're men? The greatest commonality is there is not a dad in the home. So our home is disintegrating to the point to where people can live for the first 18 years and never have a male influence in the home. That is a very destructive characteristic of what's happening in our society. Point number 2, they have changed our schools to where all of our schools are geared toward how a girl learns. Let me give you a couple of examples. You can take a 5-year-old girl, 5-year-old little boy, and they mature differently. If you have 3 or 4 neurons firing off, you know that a 5-year-old girl and a 4-year-old girl are not the same when it comes to their maturity level. So here's what happens. We take the 5-year-old girl and put her in a kindergarten class, and we teach her things, and she can sit still, and she can listen and actually recite the alphabet, and she can color in between the lines, and she can have a good day. But you take a 5-year-old boy, for the most part, and tell him to sit still, and he becomes fidgety. He doesn't really care to be there. He doesn't care about learning his ABCs, and by the time he's in the second grade, first or second grade, you start saying, well, you know, there's something wrong with him. He can't focus. We better test him for ADD. He's probably got ADD. He doesn't have ADD. He's got BOY. And yet, when we start a 5-year-old boy with a 5-year-old girl, she is going to excel more than him. And we start trying to say, well, that 5-year-old boy, there's something wrong with him. Let's put a label on his head, and we'll stick that there for the next 15 years or 12 years of schooling. And oh, by the way, let's get him on some drugs so we can zombie him out where he can sit still. When if he would have just started school when he was about 6 or 7, he would have been fine. And we all know by the time they're 15, the boys catch up. 15, 16, and they'll catch up. But it's too late by then. Another thing the school systems have done, almost every high school used to have a vocational program, where a young man at 12 or 13, he could go into vocational class and he could learn how to become a carpenter. He could learn the mechanics of how to be a plumber or an electrician or a mechanic. And he could learn that at school. But we've told everybody, you need to go to college. There are more girls in college that enroll in college than guys now. And we have taken a large section of our young men and told them that blue-collar work, you know, don't worry about that. We want you to become a lawyer or engineer or something like that. And so we relegate them to second-class citizens. And their education gets to a point, and that's why so many young men drop out of school. So many young men just say, there's really not anything for me here. So we have an educational system that has deleted most of vocational education. We have started young boys in class too soon. We have labeled them that something is wrong with them when there's nothing wrong with them. And wonder why they quit school in groves. Another thing we have done is change the labor laws to where if you are 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old young man, you probably cannot get a job anywhere. Now keep in mind, there are ditches on both sides of the road because you don't want a 10-year-old working in a factory for 12 hours a day. So you should have some kind of labor laws. But like so many things the government does, it goes too far. And there are many 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds, 14 and 15 that would like to work, that would like to make extra money, that would like to learn how to do something, but the law says you can't work because you're not old enough. And what happens is that is the time in a young boy's life, that's when he develops a work ethic. And when you have a 12 or 13 or 14-year-old that would like to go to work, no, you can't go to work. You can't do that. You can't stack stuff at Walmart. You can't work over here. You just sit still until you're 16. What does he do? He starts becoming a gamer. And then he goes, and he becomes an expert on gaming, and he can do all of these things. And what happens, then when he turns 16, and the mom says, go out and get a job, oh no, I don't want to work. He's missed the window to where his work ethic should have been developed, and by the time he's 16, he doesn't want to work anymore. So when it comes to family, when it comes to school, when it comes to the idea of working for a living, we have decimated, and it has been incredibly nefarious and insidious and destructive on the psyche of young men. And then I'll cover one more. And that is the entertainment industry. It is almost impossible now to have a good role model for a young man. Man, when I was growing up, we had John Wayne. He was one bad dude. You didn't mess with John Wayne. We had all these movie stars that were good. And even when we sat down to watch a TV program, we would see shows like Father Knows Best. We would see shows like Leave It to Beaver. We would see shows like Gunsmoke. We would see all of these shows that had strong male characters in it. Men you could look up to, men you would want to be like. Men of courage. Men that got things done. Now, these programs even outdate, but I bet you know who they are. Y'all ever seen the program Seinfeld? Let me tell you something. Seinfeld is a wimp. Seinfeld is a sissy boy. And George. Do you know who George is in Seinfeld? How about Kramer? That's the men that are portrayed now. Believe me, you don't want to grow up to be Kramer or George or Seinfeld. Or how about the show Everybody Loves Raymond? Have y'all seen that? Everybody loves it. It's funny. It's funny as rip. But Raymond is a sissy. He's a feminized man. The wife runs everything in that household. Raymond doesn't do anything but take orders from his wife. Oh, and then how about Friends? That wonderful show about 4 or 5, 2 or 3 guys, 2 or 3 girls, and it really should be called Friends with Benefits, should be the name of it, because all they are is guys and girls that shack up with each other over time, and that is the idea of a feminized mindset. A feminized mindset that we are pouring our young men into and asking them to conform into an ideology so we can eliminate toxic masculinity. And it is one of the most insidious, pernicious, demonic ideas that has ever come down the pike. Because the same testosterone and the same drive that causes men to go to war is also what causes men to stand up and become soldiers and policemen and combat those that are evil. So you cannot eliminate one without the other.